All right, good evening, everybody, um, and welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. Particularly happy to have Dr. Izak Maree with us again. For most of you, he needs no introduction, but just to remind everyone that he's been a part of the logotherapy world for some time and an integral part of the Viktor Frankl Institute of Logotherapy South Africa. And we always feel very honored and privileged to have him back to address us, which we have several times this year. And I can assure you that we're all in for a very meaningful evening on a topic which is, I think, very relevant to all of us. So, Izak, lovely to have you here. Welcome back, and over to you. And thank you for your input.
Thank you very much, Mark, and good evening to all friends known and unknown. It is a privilege for me to speak to you again. The last time we spoke about finding meaning in a difficult career. And tonight we're talking about a topic that I think can be controversial. I'll try and get our minds around it from a logotherapy perspective. So firstly, this is not a scientific discussion or a scientific lecture about what global warming is and how it may or may not affect us. You have from complete deniers on the one side to people saying that the world is about to end. So we're not going to debate whether it's this one or that one, but we're rather going to talk about what does logotherapy teach us about approaching difficult subjects. And having said that it's not a scientific lecture, I do think we need to start not more than 5 minutes, I promise, about what we understand scientifically and about the history of the Earth. So let's start with the history of the Earth. I think there's a semi-agreement that the world is about 4.6 billion years old. And in that period of time, we've gone through multiple cycles of climate change. It has been ranging from times when the Earth was completely covered in snow and ice to periods of time when there was no snow or ice on this planet. The last one being the age of the dinosaurs, which was just yesterday in terms of 4.6 billion. That was only for 65 million years ago. And the dinosaurs lived on Earth where it was extremely moist and very warm. And there were trees everywhere, and we are still driving on the fossil fuels of those days, even today. But the North Pole were not covered in ice, and neither was any of the mountains as we know it today. And then the last cycle of a relatively cold one was called the Little Ice Age, which was only 150 years ago. So between about 1800 and 1900, the Earth was quite cold. And then the theory is that we started burning fossil fuels, etc., and the Earth has warmed since. So the first point is that climate change is not new to this planet. And climate change generally goes together with quite dramatic events. So climate change can happen over a period of 100 to 200 to 500 to even sometimes a million years. Or it can happen extremely rapidly, like the poor dinosaurs found out. It can happen with a meteorite striking the Earth and ending species and a whole era, and plunging the Earth within quite a few years after that into an ice age, which lasted very long and led to the extinction of species. So we do know that when these things happen, it generally is accompanied by the extinction of species. Multiple reptiles went extinct. The dinosaurs is a good example that went extinct. And in our recent past, the poor mammoths was not only the result of human change, but also due to climate change, because they couldn't stand the warmer temperatures that resulted. So this, however, is the first time that a species has been responsible for the climate change, for the change of our climate. There's two things that are unique about this one. The first one is it's not necessarily a natural phenomenon, but then one would say humans are natural phenomenons. So If humans cause it, it can also be seen as a natural phenomenon. But it also happens over a relatively short period of time. So we start seeing in the 1950s the first change, and it accelerates from a scientific point of view up to the point of today, where we have about 2 to 2.5 degrees change in temperature already. And luckily, this is the end of my science for tonight, so now we can talk logotherapy. Frankl says to us that in the midst of unimaginable suffering, he made a remarkable discovery. While people could lose everything, possessions, families, even health, there remained one thing that people could not take away, and that is your freedom to choose. Because we do know that this climate that we're going through and these changes will lead to suffering. And we see that already. We see landslides, we see more rain, we see increased temperatures. Anyone that has looked at Europe currently would see that there are in excess deaths recorded of between 5 and 10,000, depending on what you read. So we are seeing a period of climate change, and we have the responsibility, or we have the choice that we have to make, is what will our response be to that? If we go to Frankel's life, we know that he went through a period of intense suffering, and his choice of how he responded to that gave birth to the science or the psychology of logotherapy. Frankl also says to us that between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is a power to choose the response. And in that response, time lies your growth and your freedom. One of the tenets of logotherapy is the freedom of choice. And in the period between stimulus and response is when you have to act and make your own decisions, and no one can make that for you regarding your response. So climate change is the stimulus in this case, and we can choose our response, each one individually, but also as a collective human race, we can decide. So we also did not choose the century in which we were born. Neither did we choose to inherit this environmental disaster that we are busy facing. But what we can do is we can choose our response. So we all know that we see more heat waves, droughts, heavier rainfall, rising sea levels, all those things. It is becoming a humanitarian crisis. So it has gone for us from a logotherapeutic response. It is the response to a humanitarian crisis. Just like we can choose to respond, how would we choose when there's a big earthquake in Venezuela? Do we sit back and say, we can just let it go? Or do we as humanity decide, or as an individual decide how we will respond? So the question here is, as an individual, as well as humanity, how are we going to respond? And if we look at Frankl, he also taught us that our biggest challenge and our motivation is not through pleasure or power, but through finding meaning. I mean, it all started with his famous book, Man's Search for Meaning. That's where the whole story started. And meaning is found by three things. I always come back to that. The creation, the attitudinal values, and the experiential values. So each one in this humanitarian crisis that we have the choices. If we start with a creative choice, we have individually and jointly the choice to create something that is unique. What can we create? Can we create a better earth than what we found or what we've caused? And that's also important, is the tendency of humans and individuals to say, it wasn't me, all right? Why should I respond it wasn't me. I inherited this from people that had coal-fired power plants, etc. And then I'd like to remind us that today, you and me are living in a world where we are contributing more CO2 than probably in the last 100 years combined. So we can't say it wasn't me. We can say that we inherited some of the technology, but we also know that blame shifting is not something that is an part of the tenet of logotherapy. I always think of the analogy and the metaphor of the dam wall that burst, and it flooded villages and it killed millions of people. And the burst of the dam wall was caused by a massive, massive hail and rainstorm, consisting of billions and billions of raindrops. And afterwards, when the inquiry started, it's a metaphor, right? So bear with me. People asked each individual raindrop, did you cause the dam wall to burst? And the response from every single raindrop was, it wasn't me. I'm a little small raindrop. How could I burst a dam wall? And because there were 10 billion raindrops that had that attitude, the dam wall burst, because it was part of a collective that added to a massive flood that made the dam wall to burst. So we are 8 billion people on this planet, and each one of us always say, but my little contribution will make no difference. I had this discussion this morning. It was quite interesting. And the persons that I have the discussion with said, you know what? I don't really mind about this because America is making all the CO2. All right, that's a raindrop response, okay? Or China or India or whoever. So perhaps we can always think about what the little raindrop would respond to this. So we have the option through our creative values that we can create something unique. We can build cleaner energy. We can build better farming practices. We can do educating communities, or we can educate our children in ways to help this. Each one of us can decide before we go to town whether we really need to go to town to buy 1 liter of milk, or can we go tomorrow and buy the milk and the dog food and everything at once. And that would be a raindrop that takes a little bit of responsibility for its actions. Do we keep our lights on at night, or do we switch them off? The examples go on and on. The second thing is how we create value is always through our experiential values. Now, just imagine an earth as we know it that no longer exists. An earth where it's desertified, if there's such a word, where the waves are so high that you can hardly have a day on the beach. You can think of how this earth from a scientific perspective will look into the future and ask yourselves, is that the experience that we want? And is that the experience that we want to leave for our children? Because people protect what they love. And I think it's a general human trait that we love nature and we love this earth. And meaning can be found through trying to protect that what you love. We all protect our families because we love them. We all love this earth, but we don't necessarily recognize or realize it. And then, of course, the one that I want to stop at a little bit is the attitudinal value. Back to Frankl with his suffering and what he taught us about suffering. So first of all, that Frankl never glorified suffering. And that's a point I always try to make. You don't have to suffer to find meaning. It's not a glorious thing to suffer because you get pity from everybody. But our attitudinal value towards suffering sets us apart if we are logotherapists and if we follow the tenet of logotherapy. And Frankl teaches us that suffering can be transformed into human achievement simply by the attitude we take. And climate change, we know, will bring suffering. We know that species will disappear. hopefully not the human species in the process. Communities will be displaced, lives will be disrupted, and some of the damage that we are doing and will be doing will never be undone. But despair is not our option. It's not an option that we say that is what it is what it is. We suffered over here and we blame the countries with the most CO2 into the air. That's not an option to us. Frankel's quote is, when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are actually challenged to change ourselves. We cannot influence the policy of other countries or even our country, but we can influence our response to this and our way of managing this situation as a little raindrop. It's also a moral challenge that we face in becoming wiser, more responsible, and more compassionate, because we also know that freedom, the freedom of choice, comes with the second part of the freedom of choice, which is, and I know you'll all say, responsibility, because freedom comes with the responsibility. We have the freedom of choice, but we also have the freedom to choose responsibly. So what would you respond to a future generation? Our children that may not be born, our grandchildren that Leonard Cohen says that are screaming to be born 2 generations down the line, people we don't even know of who will refer to us as their ancestors. How will they remember us? What will they ask from us? And we won't be here to answer. They will say, you knew. We cannot claim ignorance. And the next question they'll ask is, what did you do, even as you knew? Another quote from Frankl says, live as you were living already for the second time, and as if you had acted the first time as wrongly as you are about to act now. I'm going to repeat that quote at the end of the presentation. What would you do differently if you were to live again with regards to climate change? How will you answer the future generation that is not yet born? What will be your moral stance if that generation tonight could sit here with us and be part of this presentation? What would we tell them? Because knowledge also creates responsibility. And then we need to talk about optimism and hope. So optimism is just saying, don't worry, everything will work out. Optimism is not necessarily a pragmatic approach. Sit back and hope that everything will work out. But hope is a different thing. Hope says that whatever happens, life still has the meaning and your choice still matters. So back to the concentration camps of Auschwitz. Hope said, we are still alive and we can still choose to do something today, even though we will be dying tomorrow or may be dying tomorrow. We may be in the gas chamber tomorrow, but our choices, even today, on the last day on this earth, still matter. So we cannot predict how climate change will unfold. The scientists tell us a specific prediction. We do not know how true that is. Just like you could not predict whether Auschwitz would end or not end in a day or in a year or in a month. But what you do in that time certainly does matter. So every generation faces challenges. It's the interesting thing of life is that you can think of any period in history and there were unique challenges in that period. If we think only 100 years ago, there was a Second World War, and just before that, there was a First World War. And in that time, people had to make different and difficult choices. Back to the Frankel example, people could say, we We have optimism that this war will end, and one day Hitler will see the error of his ways, or they could make the choice to take up arms and resist and eventually bring peace to the planet. So we have a choice as well. The biggest challenge to this generation is actually not, you know, the Strait of Hormuz that is closed or opened or not. That's not the biggest challenge of our generation. COVID was not the biggest challenge of our generation. COVID killed a few million people. Yes, it did, and it was a challenge, but it's not the biggest challenge. Our biggest challenge to us and our generations after us is actually how we are going to live in a world that we cannot even imagine today as we sit here. And that world is not far away. We see that world taking shape around us already. It has the ability to completely change the way that this species and most other species on this planet will live. As I said before, species will go extinct. Um, things will change dramatically. And I'm going to want to close with a favorite allegory before I get back to the previous quote. So there was an old man that was planting an olive tree, and a young traveler walked past him and laughed at him. He said, "Old man, do you know how long an olive tree takes before it bears olives?" And the old man just laughed and he continued planting the olive tree. He continued digging because the old man found meaning in creating something that he never even would see the fruits of. He found his meaning and his joy knowing that he is making a difference to probably 2 generations from then who will be eating from that olive tree. And what was his motivation for digging and planting that olive tree? It was not a motivation that he's going to eat that olives, but he wanted to leave something meaningful behind and do something meaningful with a few days or years or moments that he may have left on this earth. I'm going to close with um, the quote that I gave before. So live as if you were living already for the second time, and as if you had acted the first time as wrongly as you are about to act now. If humanity were given a second chance, a second life, would history say that this generation recognized the warning? And will we choose responsibly? Thank you for listening to me so attentively and would love to discuss a little bit of what we've said. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Izak. Thank you for that wonderfully insightful sharing. I think what you've done this evening is put into a nutshell why logotherapy is still so relevant in the world today. We're talking a lot in the Institute at the moment about expanding the footprint of therapy, of logotherapy, and bringing it to the attention of a far greater population than is aware of it currently. And I suppose one can only make people believe that something has meaning and value if it is relevant to their lives. And Frankl spoke about logotherapy as being a therapy for its time. And I think in the 21st century, that is truer than it ever has been. We are facing so many challenges as a species, as a planet, as individual communities, that logotherapy is becoming ever more relevant. So there are many things I'd like to pick up on what you spoke to us to about tonight. The first thing I'd like to say is if I didn't know what logotherapy was and I listened to your talk, I would have a very clear understanding of it, of what the basis of logotherapy is and what its core tenets are and how we can apply it to our day-to-day lives. And that for me is so meaningful and valuable. I'd like to start where you ended with the story of the olive tree, that beautiful story of the man who was doing something that he would never see the fruits of himself, but that would be seen and realized in later generations. And that is the the embodiment, I think, of living in the state of what Frankl calls healthy tension between that which has not been achieved and that which is yet to be achieved. And here was a man who was saying, I understand that what I am beginning will not see its full fruition, its achievement in my lifetime, but that does not mean that I should live not doing that. I am living in that state of healthy tension, which will continue and even pass on to people in later generations, because that olive tree will only bear its fruit later. And I think that is such a beautiful example of that, of what that state of healthy tension actually is, as opposed to the state of homeostasis, the state of tensionlessness, which is not what we aim for in logotherapy. I'd like to pick up on the parable, or the beautiful story of the raindrop. And it struck me that water is a force both for great growth and creativity. We need water to survive. We need water for plants to grow, for the planet to survive. But we also know that water can be a hugely destructive force. And we know that our own bodies consist, the greatest percentage of the makeup of our bodies is water. And perhaps that is why we are just like water. We have the potential to do wonderful creative things which help the planet grow and develop. But we also have the ability to cause great destruction and harm to ourselves, to the world around us, to our environment, to other human beings. And so I think the question we have to ask ourselves on a daily basis is, am I the single raindrop whose tiny little contribution goes towards creating something positive for the world? Or am I the tiny raindrop whose tiny little contribution adds to the destruction of the world? And this brings me to, of course, my favorite Viktor Frankl quote, which I'm sure all of you are sick of hearing me quote ad nauseum. There are only two races of people in the world, the race of the decent and the race of the indecent. And of course, what Frankl says is that, unfortunately, the race of the indecent is in the majority. And so the race of the decent may well ask, well, what is the point then? What is the point of my attempting to live life as a decent human being when the majority of the population of the world belong to the race of the indecent, probably always have been, and probably always will be? And Frankl gives us a very clear answer to that, is that the only way we can prevent the race of the indecent from taking over completely and causing that destruction of the dam wall, we have to be the raindrops that are keeping that dam wall structural and whole, and recognizing that our contribution to decency in the world, if we practice it within the tiny little circle of our existence, if everybody in the world were to do that, we would soon, I think, turn that situation around. I think that the idea of living responsibly has never been more relevant than it is now, with the kind of challenges we are facing. And again, I think that the subject of global warming, and I was very interested to see how you were going to tackle it, and you tackled it from such a pure logotherapeutic standpoint that it's almost for me a metaphor for life in the 21st century, and how we are being questioned by life, by the universe, by God, whatever one happens to choose to believe in. What are we being challenged to do? Yes, to live with great freedom, but as you say, to live with great responsibility. And that includes taking on the responsibility for what has been caused by those who have gone before us. We cannot just simply sit back and say, I was not part of this. We have to recognize, what is that expression, be part of the change you want to see. And that doesn't mean that because you didn't contribute to the change, to the negative, that you don't have to contribute to the change that you would like to see. And as logotherapists, I think and hope that that's what we inspire in the people we work with, to contribute meaningfully within our own little corners of life to the constant growth of the race of the decent in the world. Thank you, Izak. A wonderful presentation.
Thank you very much, Mark. I really do appreciate what you say. There was, and my mind misses it now, but Frankel had a quote which I had as part of my notes, which I may have missed, which went along something like, "Oh yes, I know where it is." It's one of my favorite Frankel quotes. It says, "What does the world? What does the like you were saying, the decent and the indecent? You may ask, what does the world owe me? What does the world owe us?" The Frankel says, what does life ask of us? And he also said, life calls you. And the question is, how are you going to respond? And if you respond, not me, then why do you respond, not me? And if not me, then who? The last part is like, if not me, then who? Um, and I think for me, that was one of the powerful things. If you are asked to respond, your answer should be, well, if not me, then who? Um, yeah, thank you for that, Mark. Sean, I see you've been listening very closely and attentively, and you also shared some thoughts on the matter, which you emailed. So I would love to also perhaps just get your thoughts on the subject of tonight. Or am I putting you on the spot?
Well, I am on Mars at the moment, as you know,
Yeah, there you
with
go.
my background, and we are desperate for water. So, it is a challenge. So yes, the work that I've done in climate change and how it physically affects people is incredibly um, important in terms of where we are, in terms of the human being. And one of my ones is related to the age of rage and how heat and the global warming affects us as human beings in terms of global warming and the heat. Hydration and the human body breaks down in terms of these, and how do we deal with these aspects? And one thing that I didn't really uh, embroider on in my work was to share with you the work that I've done related to the inhumane mind and people who struggle and who go out and get raged and go out and hurt other people. And you'll find that this often happens in a nightclub where there is so much noise. We are affected by our senses in terms of noise, heat, all of these things become aggressive. It makes us aggressive. So all of these stimuli are so very important of how it affects us and related to what happens when we have terrorist acts around the world related to the war in Iran, for example, the war in Afghanistan. If we look at the temperatures that the soldiers are fighting under in those ones, it makes them extremely angry. The heat exposure affects our bodies immensely. It affects how we breathe. It affects all of our senses. And so, very important are these aspects of science, which in fact affects us all the time. Hydration being one of them. We break down, we faint. And you, being a doctor, you know all of these aspects of the breakdown that's causing it. And I think there's not enough awareness in terms of how we, as the raindrop, can help to provide awareness, be proactive, and make sure that when you go out, that you take a bottle of water with you, that you actually drink the bottle of water. And I think those are very important things that we don't do enough in terms of being a raindrop. And I think from the other point of view of the decent and indecent is certainly related to the moral compass. And has the world lost its moral compass? And how can we as a raindrop, and I love that analogy, Izak, of the moral compass, how can we do that? And then, of course, we have the collective aspect and not just the raindrop aspect of how can we embrace the collective aspect of embrace and getting other people onto our to have more raindrops join us in our collective. And I think that's so very, very important in terms of trying to get that going. When we look at Dubai and how what Dubai looks like today, it is so wonderful that although it's artificial, that they're trying and they're trying to do and to try and create and bring back nature. So we live in a concrete jungle, at the moment. Do you know that if we look at photographs today of color in the world, opposed to color in, let's call it 1899, our colors have changed. So if we look at of color, for example, that we having artificial light, we having artificial colors, and it's fading away. The other aspect that I wrote about, as you saw, is about the Earth's rotation on its axis. And the Earth's rotation affects us as a human being in terms of our brain and how this happens. And gravity is changing dramatically. And those are the various aspects of which we don't really understand that's already happening. What can we do? We can have the raindrop analogy. Thanks, Izak.
Thank you so much, Sean, and thanks for the insights. It is amazing if we talk about the science, how it affects your body, number one, but how it also affects the collective. There was an article today on BBC about the ship of the desert, the dromedary camels, how they are actually, as a species, unable to respond to this. The animal that is the best suited for high temperatures, not able to live with this, and dromedaries, their reproductive system also stops working. Yeah, it just gets to the point where one realizes that this is amongst us. It's not theory anymore. It is actually a reality with us, and it affects individual human beings as well.
If I may say, Izak, your last lecture to us was wonderful, relating to nature and all of those wonderful things. And I think that we need more of those kind of outside events. So we sit and we do Zoom inside. Why don't you do Zoom outside, as an example? And I think that if people can understand there are these differences, that we can actually do that and take Zoom outside, just as an example, and we can hear and see all of these things. And I'm really relating to your last one about walking in nature and being in nature. And I think that certainly the generation, our young people, certainly do not have that exposure. And perhaps we need to try and create, and maybe our responsibility is to try and help them to see more about nature, to live outside a bit more, and to experience those aspects.
Thanks, Sean.
Sorry, I can't see for some reason on my screen if anyone has their hand up. So, Issa, can you see if there's anyone who wants to speak?
Haven't, don't see a hand up at the moment. Maybe you can't see because there isn't a hand up.
Could I just say something else at this point? Sean, just a couple of things that you said resonated with me. The two terms that I picked on were stimuli and the collective. We've done a lot of talks at the Institute over the last year about logotherapy and nature, and how as human beings we respond to, relate to, interact with nature. And every time we've had one of those discussions, the end result of that discussion has been we are actually part of nature. We are actually part of nature itself. But when we talk about global warming, we talk about it as this thing that affects nature as though it's something separate from us. We talk about it's affecting animals, and you alluded to communities disappearing. But a lot of us, I think, are hooked into the mindset that global warming is something that affects other things in the world.
Other people, and yeah.
People. And Sean, you spoke about how stimuli affect us. And so the stimuli that are put into the world through global warming are affecting all of us on all kinds of levels. And then, of course, the other word, the collective, we need to start thinking of ourselves not as the human collective, but as the nature collective. We are part of nature. And as such, if we are doing things that are contributing to the worsening or the intensity of global warming, we're actually, in a sense, betraying our very own collective. And if we can start to see ourselves as being part of the world, part of nature, just one of the many cogs in the wheel of this great cycle. I always think of the primary school drawing, the food chain, of us being there as part of this wonderful collective that makes the world is made up of all kinds of natural and other phenomena of which we are an integral part and not something that we can sit separately from. And I think that is how some things like global warming and wars and all those things happen, is because we hold ourselves separate, and not only separate, but superior to so many of our fellow inhabitants of the world of different species. And as soon as we stop doing that and see ourselves as part of this collective, which is being affected in its entirety by what we as human beings are doing, then I think we can start to look at it differently.
I like that part. As a collective, we look at food security, we look at water security, we look at all these various aspects. And I think that very often, and I have to say this about our government, is that we look at the water security. Now there's talk about how it's going to be secured through people who need water and people who don't need water, having a JoJo tank. Out of interest, when there is a shut-off of water, this becomes a bit selfish in a sense, because those people who have JoJo tanks, their JoJo tanks are filled up first through many, many liters of water before everybody else gets water. So, we're starting to look at where the impact of trying to look after ourselves and not just being the raindrop is that it's an interesting fact. So, for example, I live in a high-lying area, and the high-lying area of my road is that I'm not going to get water until all the JoJo tanks are filled up, and only then will I get some water. So, these are things we don't actually always think about, and we say, oh, well, forget about those people. Don't worry, I'm looking after myself. And I think it's a shared responsibility, Mark. I say it's a shared responsibility. We call it collective, but it's a shared responsibility to make people aware of that. I also looked at a situation and said, well, we'll bring a water tanker to your area. So the water tank into your area is already all well and great. I have to now get in my car, perhaps. I now have to go and take a can. I now have to open up the tap on the water tanker. I now have to fill up the water tanker that I'm doing, my little bucket or whatever it is. I have to put it in my car. Now, to put it in my car, it's pretty heavy, A. B, how do I schlep the water without it being spilt to get it to my house? And I don't think that people really think about these things. So there's the water tanker. Why don't you have the tanker that goes around the particular suburb, and people can come out and get it there? But no, we've given you a water tanker. So I think there's so much more we can do to try and say, but this is not just a water tanker there. Why doesn't it be mobile? Why isn't it there? What about old people? How did they manage to do it without spilling water in your car? Sorry, but these are things that I think are so simple, yet we can try and think of ways to try and make life a bit easier with what we have and can share.
That's a very good point, Sean. And I was given a very salutary lesson, which I'm a little ashamed to share, but I'm going to share it. I was a destructive raindrop because I didn't think properly. When I moved to where I currently live on a beautiful mountain, someone said to me, you put a borehole down here, you're going to have, you will never be without water. So we did. Sunk a very deep borehole, and we have 5,000 liters per, I don't know, but it is way, 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 way more than I could ever, and my family could ever use, no matter in our lifetime. And one day, I was unthinkingly with a client, and we were talking about water, and I happened to say, have you got a borehole? And she said, no, I would never, ever do that, because water belongs to everyone. And this hit me like a bolt out of the blue, and I suddenly realized how incredibly selfish the sinking of that borehole was, because I am drawing the thousands of liters of water that's under the ground there for the good of the planet, the world, and I'm using it for my silly little garden that's that big. And so I've really had to rethink my borehole and what I do with it. And so we've now started, inviting people who don't have water to come and collect water from us and things like that. But it's just, I like to think of myself as a decent person, but sometimes we just don't think far enough, and we just look at our own needs and, oh, that'll going to make my life so much easier. But we have to, we're back to the collective. Yeah. How dare we actually take the resources that are there for everybody and harvest them just for ourselves? It was a very, very big learning, steep and hard learning curve for me. Thanks.
But Mark, that is, we had a debate the other day about, and it's really about resources. In your case, you're talking about a water resource. But if we think about resources in general, and a general resource is money as well. If you, there are some of us that have more money than others, and to such and money is just a form of a resource. So one can get into the ethical debate of, like Tolstoy, the book that he wrote is How Much Land Does a Man Need? And the answer is only 6 feet, because that's what you need to get buried under. And it's the same with money. If you collect and hoard such a large amount of resources, you're doing a borehole, and of taking what could be shared and what could be a resource that could be used by many of us around. And for the first, please don't get me wrong, I'm not a socialist. I'm a little bit of a capitalist myself, but there are limits to everything. So, you don't want to be like, just give everything that you have away and then use it with nothing. So I don't think it's unethical to look after yourself, not at all. But there is a point when sharing of resources, it becomes unethical to hoard more than what you need. And that is, I think that is a part of logotherapy, that we also, with the freedom of having resources, also comes the responsibility of approaching it in a collective way. Whether it is your time that you share, whether it is your money, your wisdom, there are thousands of things we each have around this table, lots of unique and individual talents, which we can share to the betterment of humanity. And one of those being the resource called money. And the over hoarding of money, to me, has always been something that I'm not preaching against money, not at all, but I'm just trying to make a point.
Yeah.
Well, can you tell me where the money tree is, please? I'd love to know.
You'd like to know where it is. Tell me when you know. Tell me when you find it.
Yeah.
We can share it, Sean.
Would that we could do a borehole for money and get that resource as easily as we can tap into the water. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anybody else got anything
Well, Helen's got her hand up.
Thanks, Helen. Thanks, Sean.
Thank you, Izak, for such a great presentation. You really got me thinking about sort of my own responsibility. And one of the things that stands out for me is around knowledge leads to responsibility. And it just made me think about my experience last week. So I was just blessed to be in Mauritius last week with my family, and I hadn't been back for 13 years. So in 13 years, I was keen to see what had happened on the island and how it had grown and developed. And on the first day, we obviously arrived at the hotel, and I was just keen to get into the ocean. And so I just got into that turquoise water. It was 22 degrees. And I just remember having a moment of complete awe at just God's creation, at how magnificent this water is. What an absolute joy to be able to enjoy the ocean. And I just lay on my back and looked up at the sky, and your ears are under the water, so it's very quiet, and just have that moment of stillness. And then on the second day, we decided we'd go, my husband and I decided we'd take a walk into Granby, because the hotel was in Granby, and we thought, let's just go and have a walk around. And what confronted us was just chaos. So from being in the serenity of this hotel and enjoying the beauty of nature, to now just being on an island that felt like it had imploded in those 13 years. Just people and cars and bikes and consumption and litter, and just that sharp contrast. And then when we went back to the hotel, I was obviously just doing a walk around, and I noticed there was an entire corner devoted to sustainability. So, what is the hotel doing to diminish or decrease their impact on the planet? And it was extensive. It was just absolutely amazing and just made me think about, to Mark's point around the decent and the indecent. Here's this almost epitome of I don't know, luxury or a haven where everything's done right in the decent way. And then you've got this indecent sort of real world that happens out there. And I'm wondering, as everybody's talking tonight about what is the solution here, and what this hotel did so well was that they had daily reminders in the rooms, in the bathroom. It confronted you in the hotel. Look what we're doing. And then when I did the review of the hotel, one of the aspects that they asked me to rate was, why would you choose this hotel? Or why did you choose this hotel? Sustainability was one of the factors on there, which really gave me a lot of hope that there's these real pockets of excellence. But is the solution around maybe these daily awarenesses or perhaps social norms? I don't know if you remember SABC's ad where they said, pay your TV license, it's the right thing to do.
Okay.
I almost feel like that's relevant here, look
Yeah.
after the planet,
Yeah.
play your part because it's the right thing to do. And those social norms, they stick with you. If everybody else starts doing that, it becomes really hard for you to do the opposite, because it's the right thing to do. And so I'm wondering, maybe it's in the daily awarenesses, maybe it's not in the forefront of our consciousness as human beings. We know that it's happening out there, as was said previously. But I just loved this contrast between how this hotel was just doing it so beautifully. And yeah, that gives me hope. But going out into Grand Bay made me despair and think, oh, there's so much work to be done. Yeah. Anyway, I just thought I'd share that experience. Thank you. I've
Thank you.
really enjoyed tonight.
Thank you so much, Helen. And I know Sean's got his hand up and we only have 6 minutes, but I perhaps just want to quickly respond to you. And also to say that knowledge is power, and the sustainability is a way of life. One of the interesting things that we see is the more advanced and the more wealthy people put more CO2 in the air than the guy living in squalor. So, and I'm just using the example of myself as well, who call myself a very earth conscious person who loves the environment and feel that I want to be the raindrop for change. Yet I have a very large Gasling 4x4 that I use to travel to Botswana to go and enjoy nature with. The amount of CO2 that I put into the air by doing that is more than that little small African village that I go to visit. It is a conundrum because we often think that it's not me. I also love traveling overseas. So going to visit the Brazilian rainforest is actually something that I did last year. And when you think of the damage that I caused by going to visit the Brazilian rainforest just by flying there, okay, has been actually tremendous. So the way that I think about it is whatever damage you cause, you have to try and uncause. So there's also good things that I do, like installing solar at my house. So I'm then saving on the CO2 I'm putting into the air, buying an electric car because I'm saving on the damage that I do. And perhaps you can say that I'm just trying to appease my conscience for the flights that I take overseas. But but one has to have this argument and conscious discussion with yourself as well. Having a warm bath late at night and filling it up twice is more dangerous to or harmful to the environment than many of the other things that people that live in villages do. So it's just a thought process and just painting the opposite as well. And sometimes we specifically, I'm not trying to criticize, I'm just making a point. You would, and it's actually a big thing in travel these days, if you have a fancy hotel on on the Maldives, or in this case, Mauritius, etc. Just by having that hotel and letting people fly there, the amount of CO2 that you are causing and putting into the air with the electricity and the flights and the cars and everything that you get there is actually so bad that it's great that they do everything they can to limit it. And that is good. That is really good. Planting more trees, trying to undo what we do. But it is also a debate one has to have with yourself. And I'm guilty of that debate because I put a lot of CO2 in the air, which I don't have to.
Okay, if I may say, just to try and finish off, Helen, I love that analogy. I think that the daily awareness sometimes can be a problem because you begin to ignore it. I think that like little notes on the taps in the room would be great. Use water sparingly when you're actually going to use something. And I think that that's the kind of thing I want to do. So I have a challenge. I've been thinking about this. How about at supermarkets and at KFC and McDonald's and those places? I say, be aware, you want to continue to be obese, please eat our foods. And we have such an obese problem around the world, is that before you go into a supermarket and go and buy stuff, why don't there be awareness board to say, look after your health? Do you want to continue to be fat? And actually put it out there. And I think that's one of the things of being awareness, is to actually put it out there. Do you want to be fat? Well, when you go in the supermarket, think about that.
You say it straight, Sean, as you always do.
Thank you. Thanks, Sean, and thanks, Izak. I'd just like to end by also throwing out a bit of a challenge. And I was thinking when Helen was talking about the pockets of excellence, and how is it that we manage to sustain the state of what Frankl calls tragic optimism, the state in which we live? And I suppose that it's partly looking for those pockets of decency, making sure that we are as decent as we possibly can be. And that includes, so what you said, having the debate. We've all bared our souls tonight a little bit and admitted our sins in relation to some of these issues we are talking about. But I think as long as we are aware and constantly having the debate and looking at ways to change our behavior, because I think that's the important thing. We can only achieve more decency in the world through change, and we need to achieve that through sustaining our state of tragic optimism, saying yes to life in spite of everything, including global warming. Thank you, Izak, for a truly wonderful and meaningful presentation, and thanks to everybody for joining us.
Thank you, everybody, for having me again. It has been a great pleasure. Thank you and good night.
Good night, Izak.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks so much.